This is the Bat Flip Podcast. Now here's your host, Damien, David, and Matt.
Hello and welcome in everybody to another season preview edition of the Bat Flip Podcast. I'm Matt here today with David, and we're going to talk about the Tampa Bay Rays on this one. So I guess we could start off with the Rays by saying what a weird offseason they've had. And an unfortunate offseason because it was a tragic event that caused it to be so weird. Hurricane Milton ravaged the Tampa Bay area and really did a number on St. Pete and tore up their stadium, which was already kind of on the way out. So prayers to everybody in Florida still recovering from that. But obviously, there's a lot of baseball implications there too, as the Rays, who have been playing in the St. Pete and the Trop for a long time, now are going to be playing in a different ballpark this year in the minor league stadium in Tampa. So definitely an interesting thing there. It's kind of thrown their whole relocation plan out of whack. And I think that we've been beginning these episodes kind of by talking about the state of the franchise. And this franchise is so weird because they never spend money, but they find a way to somehow still be good. And this is like the most unique franchise in baseball. And then you throw all that stuff into it. And David, where do you think they stand right now? Like this is getting kind of crazy with this team.
There's so much that's not baseball related when it comes to the Rays, right? Because you have this stadium snafu, you have the relocation stuff with ownership, you have the Wander Franco situation, which is to be resolved, and hopefully with that guy in jail for many years. But again, you mentioned they never spend money. They spent money on one guy, and he turned out to be a horrible person, right? Like that's just, there's so many like weird non-baseball things with the Rays right now that have sent this team in such a trajectory. And I would call it a downward trajectory. I think, a couple of years ago, they won 90 games, were in the playoffs. I think they lost to the Blue Jays, but it's this point where this Rays team they're going to keep doing what they're doing, obviously, right? But at what point do they alter course and try and spend money, right? If this is a Florida teams, it's a big market, need to have some cash on hand, and the ownership group just hasn't really. I wonder if this results in a sell of the team with all this stuff going on. So, I don't know what you think about the potential issues with it when it comes to this Rays relocation stuff, but
just briefly, I wouldn't be surprised if this is a team that ends up relocating. I don't think we need to go too deep into that because in 2025 they will be playing at George Steinbrenner Field in Tampa, which is interesting, being a division rival of the Yankees. But yeah, this would be a team that they are definitely in flux, and that really does affect their offseason decision making and the types of things that they want to do with payroll. So I guess we'll start off with their offseason here and talk about what they did add and what they lost. So they added Danny Jansen, who is I think is one of the more underrated players in baseball. Nobody ever talks about him. He's a really solid catcher, good at the plate. He's okay defensively, but he's typically been pretty good at the plate. I think that's a good ad for them. Ha-Seong Kim, definitely an interesting ad because of the injury factor there. He's dealt with I think it was the shoulder, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, last year.
Shoulder.
And he's going to miss the beginning of the season. He probably will be back sometime fairly early in the season. I think that May or June might have been the time frame on him.
Yeah,
the expected time frame, late May is what they're looking at. So definitely an interesting ad. He's a guy who's been a really good player at times, and they got him for a pretty good bargain since he's been injured. Joe Boyle, we did an episode tonight of our breakout picks. That was one of Damien's breakout picks. A guy who throws like insanely hard, has crazy stuff, doesn't throw strikes. Maybe the Rays figure out how to make him throw strikes like they did Tyler Glasnow. Alex Faedo, they added. He's a he was a former pretty high level draft pick, I believe. And
Florida, right?
He was from Florida. I remember him in college as a pitcher. I don't remember if he ended up being a first rounder or not, but I remember him in college. He was a pretty good guy. They actually traded for him. And they brought in Eloy Jimenez on a minor league deal, which is interesting as a guy who at times has been a very good at times he's been a very good player. If he can ever stay healthy, he's got a lot of power. So definitely an interesting ad there. So I guess, David, this isn't a ton of ads. They're all kind of interesting. Which one do you think stands out to you? Most interesting ad out of this bunch?
Most interesting ad is for sure Ha-Seong Kim. That's a guy that signed a very short-term deal, but it was 2 years, and he's hoping to platform that, I'm assuming, into a bigger free agent contract.
Yeah.
And the ability to, again, this is the Rays trying to solve that shortstop problem that I mentioned earlier, where they did that, and now it's such a big hole at this point that they've spent money, time. Several players at this point have been, thrown in and out of that slot, and hopefully Ha-Seong Kim finally provides them with some stability after, the last guy, had has legal troubles, right? So that's the most interesting option to answer your question. I will note, did a lot of research on Danny Jansen since the Cubs were kind of going after him in free agency, and that's a good player. That was my preferred catcher option. Danny Jansen wanted the pure starting option to platform into a long-term deal, so he took 1 year as opposed to being offered multiple years, option years, stuff like that from other teams, including the Cubs. When Red Sox, I think, were interested on him as well. He left the Red Sox, goes to their division rival in the Rays, 1 year contract. So he's playing for that free agent contract. I think this will be a very motivated Danny Jansen. So if there's a best player on this list option, I'm going to say Danny Jansen. In terms of the most valuable, or most interesting, it's Ha-Seong Kim for sure, because he's such a good glove, but that bat is still very complete. And to protect him in a lineup like this, you're moving him over from San Diego, which has a lot of really good players, but Ha-Seong Kim's the guy in the lineup that you're kind of like, well, let me attack this guy. I think Ha-Seong Kim can kind of create his own narrative in a lineup that's more open, like the Tampa Bay Rays lineup, where he's maybe one of the more feared hitters in the lineup, as opposed to the Padres lineup, where he's one of the guys you want to go after.
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah, definitely the one that stands out to me is just Eloy Jimenez, just because if he ever figures it out again and gets healthy, there's 40 home run potential there still. And I mean, it's just a matter, and the Rays would be the team that would find that. I mean, they just seem like the team that would find that. So, but yeah, we can move on and talk about the subtractions here. This was a typical Rays thing where they traded a bunch of guys. They non-tendered some guys. The big loss here for me is probably Jeffrey Springs.
Right.
They traded him to the A's, and that's where they got Joel Boyle from. So they did get a major league piece back there. And they traded Jose Siri to the Mets. I believe he had been DFA'd before they traded him, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not 100% sure on that.
I think Siri got non-tendered.
Or non-tender, or he was going to get non-tendered.
Yeah, it was pre-non-tender deadline. He was going to get
non-tendered. That might have been what it was. They lost Rene Pinto off of waivers. He got claimed by the Orioles. And then Tyler Alexander was also a non-tender. And Dylan Carlson, a guy who they traded for last year, he was non-tendered as well. So I would also like to mention Colin Poche is a non-tendered guy as well. He has had some success with this team before, so I think he might be worth mentioning as well. But I guess we can move on and talk a little bit about the position player. David, first off, does any of those stand out to you at all? I mean, they're all kind of, other than Springs, they're all kind of depth pieces.
Yeah, Siri was he had the 2020 season, but from anything I've heard, the attitude in the clubhouse, some of the off the field antics were not, the Rays didn't really like him that much. And that's why they found a trade partner in the Mets, who are a group that don't really care about that. And I think, the being in a place that's, I'll call it, more suited for personality, right? With you got a lot of personalities in that Mets clubhouse, and the Rays, I guess, are a little more, we'll call it, conservative in their views and in the players on the team and stuff. So I think Siri actually ends up in a better spot with the Mets. He'll probably be backing up in center field. He'll kind of take over that Harrison Bader role that Bader was filling last year. And as for this team, we'll see what this offense looks like. But yeah, that was the only, I think, interesting subtraction, because I thought Siri is a pretty talented player, a lot of power, a lot of strikeout, decent defense in center field, but they'll replace it. I think that's just kind of what the Rays do.
Yep. So now we'll move on and talk about the hitters here. David's guy, Christopher Morel, out there in left field. That'll be interesting to see how that experiment goes. Um, we've got DeLuca in center. I believe that would be
This guy that came over in the
Damien's
Glasnow
guy.
trade.
Yeah, he
Yeah.
was in the Glassnow trade. You got Josh Lowe in right. Definitely an interesting player there. Yandy Diaz at first, still locking it down. Brandon Lau at second base. Hopefully he has a healthy year this year. Right now, they've got Taylor Walls listed at shortstop. We'll see how long that lasts. We've talked about a couple shortstops already, and then, there's a prospect that might be right on his heels here, and you got Caminero, Junior Caminero, listed at third at the moment. He's a guy that might move around a little bit, but definitely a guy to watch this year. Former top prospect. We'll see what happens there. Danny Jansen, we talked a little bit about behind the plate. And then Jonathan Aranda at DH, who, if you missed our episode we did on our breakout picks, that was Damien's hitter breakout pick. So definitely an interesting group here. This is a very Raisy group. But David, I guess talk a little bit about I think we know what Yandy Diaz is. I think we know what Taylor Walls is. Not great there. We
Kim will be
know,
in that spot.
yeah, Kim will be there
Yeah.
soon. We know that Brandon Lau and Josh Lowe are decent players. Lau being a little bit of an injury risk too, but out of those two outfielders, DeLuca, who they brought in last year in the trade with the Dodgers, and Christopher Morel, who they brought in from the Cubs in the Paredes trade, which one of those two guys do you think would be the one that could take a step this year?
I mean, it's Christopher Morel. Johnny DeLuca kind of felt like a ceilinged player, and that's kind of why the Dodgers sent him back. But he's also got capability to play center field. I think you'll also see some other guys platooning out into center field, and the Rays will be kind of searching for an answer. But it's kind of what I said when it came to Jose Siri, right? They're going to find a way. Johnny DeLuca might be that way, but Christopher Morel has 70 to 80 grade power, right? He's a great personality. He's a fun guy. Gives smiles, hugs, a bunch of people. Like he's a very likable player. I want Christopher Morel to do well, but he needs to not be playing third base is the problem, right? And the Cubs gave him that leash last season, and not only did he not play third base very well, but he also didn't hit very well. And he went over to the Rays and didn't hit very well. And I'm assuming the way Christopher Morel is as a player, he's emotional. That's in his head. This offseason, he can hopefully refocus and get to a point where he can, play well in left field and provide, some defensive value. I don't think he's going to be a very good outfielder either. Really, he should probably be in that DH spot at this point. He came up from Double-A, doesn't have the fielding chops. He doesn't have the experience, and he spent half of his major league career so far either playing a complete platoon where he just played everywhere poorly, or he tried to start at third base and was just trying to be good there and he couldn't. And so you've got a guy that, left field is a spot that players kind of end up at, but you can be really good there. I think, not to keep it on the Cubs, but a good example is Ian Happ used to play center field. He used to play second base. He's now a three-time Gold Glover in left field, right? And I think Christopher Morel can get to that point of being a really reliable left fielder with the experience, and hopefully the Rays give him that leash, and he's a really interesting player. So, the pop is off the charts, and hopefully, Morel is able to put it all together next year. I want to note before I move on that Brandon Lau projection is absurd.
Yeah.
I don't think he's gotten 3 point something more at all, but you're right. It's been because of the injuries, but like, how are you projecting him to have a full season?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
So 2021, he put up 4.5.
Right. But the last 3 years, he hasn't been close.
Since then, in 2023, he put up 2.9 in 109 games.
Yeah.
In 2024, he put up 107 games. He had 2.2, so he would have been right on the number of 3.3 if he had played a full season. But I think the thing with Brandon Lau is just like predicting him to play a full season. Right. I mean, that's the thing. It's hard to do it. Yeah, it's hard to predict him. Like, and we mentioned that this is from Fangraphs, where we've got our projected lineups and war from here.
Right.
Zips usually does a little bit better of a job of projecting a guy's playing time based on their past history. It factors that in a little bit more. And Zips has him projected for 2.8 because of playing fewer games than what the others have him projected as. So it'll be interesting to see with Brandon Lau. That's also somebody that might get traded. Because if Kim comes back and you've got Carson Williams, who we'll talk about here in a second, coming in and playing shortstop, then Kim might play second base, and then you don't have a place for Brendan Lau. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. And he's also a guy that's closer to free agency.
Mhm.
But we'll talk first here quickly. The bench. The bench is really good for the Rays compared to most benches.
Mhm.
Obviously, when you talk about a bench for a team, you're not really expecting a team that's going to have just tons and tons and tons of guys that are 2, 3, 4 WAR players. But this bench has Ben Rortvet's a good backup catcher. He's a great defender.
Hmm.
Can hit a little bit. Walks a decent amount. Jose Caballero played short for them last year. He's a solid. He can lock down shortstop when he needs to. Hit to a. I mean, he's not quite a league average hitter, but he's okay. Richie Palacios, kind of one of those platoon guys. And Eloy, we talked about him a minute
Mhm.
ago. Can he figure it out? We'll see. But that could be a guy that ends up not on the bench, but actually in the DH role at some point if he figures it out this year. So definitely a pretty deep roster here. And then all these prospects, man, they still have 6 top 100 prospects in this organization, which is just crazy. It's like every
Mhm.
year they have 6 or 7 or 8 top 100 guys. And I think the biggest one here, we got Curtis Mead, Braden Taylor, Carson Williams, Xavier Isaac, and Trey Morgan listed. I think Carson Williams is the big one. He's a top 10 prospect in baseball on Fangraphs. I think he's top
On
20 and
pipeline and two.
I was
He's
gonna say he's
10 in pipeline.
yeah, I was gonna say he's high up there in
Yep.
all of them. He's a shortstop. They need a shortstop answer after unfortunate events happened. He got to AAA in 2023. He was in AA last year, but he performed extremely well in AA in 115 games. I would not be surprised whatsoever to see him in the big leagues fairly early. And this is a guy who's got elite fielding
Mhm.
metrics in the minor leagues, and he's got power. If he ever figures out a way to cut down that strikeout rate, which has typically been in that 30% range, this is that guy that could come in May and win Rookie of the Year or something. Like if he
Yeah.
figures that out.
You hit the nail on the head though. The big issue, the glaring hole is that strikeout rate. I was just looking at the prospects. I'm trying to put together a list of my own here, and I spent a good bit of time on Carson Williams, and I don't like the profile beyond him being a good fielder. And, I think he can stick at shortstop. I don't know how much impact he's going to have. I'm worried that the strikeout rate is going to balloon once he gets to the major leagues, and um, he's young. There's lots of time.
Yep.
He can certainly develop. He can make those adjustments, but it's a scary profile, and it makes a lot of sense. And the timeline makes a lot of sense with Seong Kim being able to step in for 2 years, let Carson Williams get some development, some hit training under his belt, and then come in a couple of seasons and take that job over from Seong Kim. Other guy I really like in this list, I like Braden Taylor a lot. Xavier Isaac probably steps
Yeah,
into first base here at some point. Trey Morgan might even do it too. Both of those guys are pretty good
they're
prospects,
good.
but I like Xavier Isaac's power
Yeah.
more than Trey Morgan's. Like I saw him get compared to James Loney, former Ray. I,
Yeah.
I think that's a good comparison. Trey Morgan's like a contact oriented guy. Xavier Isaac's more of a power guy. Xavier Isaac feels like he's just going to become Yordan
Yeah.
Alvarez to me.
Yeah. The interesting thing with Trey Morgan, he's an 80 grade defender at first
Yep.
base, which is
Yeah.
super interesting.
How
But
how valuable is that though? Like in
well,
first base.
that's just you just don't see that very often.
Right.
But yeah, I'm with you on those. Definitely going to be interesting to see what happens with those guys. But I guess we'll move on real quick and talk about
Mm-hmm.
the pitching here. We have 6 guys listed. That's because Fangraphs has 6 guys listed in the rotation for the Rays, as they do most years. They mix and match and they just do stuff.
Yep.
But the biggest one here, Shane McClanahan, back in the rotation after Tommy John surgery. Excited to see what he brings to the table this year. He was unbelievable pre Tommy John surgery his entire career. 2022, he was a Cy Young favorite late in the season. Had a 2.54 ERA in 166 innings. 2023, before the injuries, was really good. Had a 3.29 ERA in 115 innings. Tommy John surgery. He's back in 2024. I mean, in 2025. We'll see what happens with him. Taj Bradley's a former top prospect who's been
Mhm.
a little bit uneven. Last year, he took a little bit of a step forward, had a 4.11 ERA last year. We'll see if he can take that next step. Lots of swing and miss for him. Not a lot of walks, The home runs have been a little bit of a problem. We'll see if he can get that under control a little bit. The metrics really did have liked his game so far, though. And then you've got Ryan Pepio, another guy brought in from the Dodgers, I believe, in the
Yep.
Glasnow trade.
Mhm.
That's another guy that former top prospect. Was pretty good for them last year. Had a 3.60 ERA in 130 innings. Really solid year for him. Zach Littell was a converted reliever who was good for them last year. Shane Baz, we'll see what they get out of him. He was a very high-rated prospect a couple years ago and hasn't really figured it out yet, dealt with a ton of injuries. And then Drew Rasmussen came back last year at the end of the season from Tommy John surgery and threw pretty well for them in his 28 innings he pitched before the season ended. And so hopefully he's fully back this year. He actually had a 2.83 ERA in those 28 innings, 4 starts, a bunch of relief appearances coming back from Tommy John. But I guess you'll see him as a little bit of a swing guy at times too.
Mhm.
But David, every single one of these guys, with the exception of maybe Zach Littell, has the upside of being an all-star. I think.
Mhm.
Which one do you think, other than McClanahan, who's already kind of hit that level, out of Bradley, Pepio, Baz, Rasmussen, which one do you think would be that guy this year?
Uh, my brain's telling me pick Taj Bradley. He feels like the kind of the obvious answer. He's already started to take the steps, like you mentioned. My heart is taking me to Drew Rasmussen. I think Rasmussen has the best pure like stuff in this group. I think he's got the experience of being a really good pitcher. He's got a couple of really good seasons for the Rays under his belt. He's just been bit by the injury bug, and it's one of those things where kind of in tandem with the Brandon Lau projection, you see the Rasmussen projection. It's really good. It's 2.1 WAR, but again, that is assuming that Rasmussen gets to a full season. At some point, I would say you have to, the guy is telling you who he is, right? If you're injured a lot, you're just someone who's going to get injured a lot. You're not able to handle the full season. But my hope is that Drew Rasmussen's injuries are kind of standalone in the past, and he's able to put together a full season. I think that's my favorite guy here to be able to do, something like you're saying, where ascend to an all-star level. If you're a Rays fan, I think your hope has to be that Shane Baz does it and gets to that point, sets up there with Shane McClanahan, 1-2 at the top of the rotation. Those guys are your playoff starters come September next season, and then one of these guys has filled out the 3 slot and you're feeling really good about that. But I think if I had to pick somebody, I think it's Rasmussen who gets it done and is able to take that step forward.
Yeah, I like that pick. I'm a Rasmussen guy as well. Definitely interesting. He's kind of coming into his own this year as hopefully having a full healthy season. And Willie Adames is the guy he was traded for, and Willie Adames is now gone from the Brewers and has hit free agency. So that's kind of the whole Rays thing: is you trade the guy before he hits free agency and get more control of a guy who gives you as much value. So we'll see if that ends up being the case with Rasmussen. But I guess we'll look at the bullpen real quick. Pete Fairbanks is a very good closer. Edwin Uceta is and Garrett Clevenger, Manuel Rodriguez, Mason Montgomery, all solid pieces there. Alex Faedo, we'll see what they get out of him. He was a first rounder back in 2017. We talked about him a little bit a minute ago. And then Mike Vasil will be closing out their bullpen here. And then the Rays, of course, have always a bunch of guys ready to step into their bullpen that are currently in the minor leagues. They typically are able to do that. They've got guys with service time down there. Cole Sulcer's one, Kevin Kelly's one. So definitely some guys to know there in their down in their farm. But I guess David, overall thoughts on their bullpen here?
This is actually one of the weakest Rays bullpens I can remember. I feel pretty poorly about this bullpen. Manny Rodriguez was a Cubs prospect for a long time. He threw 100, but he could never get anybody to strike out with it. And that's kind of carried over into his Rays career. I don't feel great about this bullpen, actually. It's rare, but then again, right, this is the Rays, so I assume somebody's going to come out of nowhere and step up. My guess for who that's going to be is Hunter Biggie. Came over in that Chris Morel trade at the deadline last year. He throws like 97. He kind of looked really good for them down the stretch. I'm surprised he's not in this depth chart as someone who's going to lock into the bullpen, but maybe that he's got control, right? So the Rays, they'll bring him up in the middle of the season and all of a sudden he'll figure it out, but it could be someone completely different that we have no idea about. Right now, though, looking at this is the weakest part of the team for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. Prospects to know, their pitching prospects, their top pitching prospects are a little bit younger. But Joe Rock, Ian Seymour, and Joe Boyle, we talked about a little while earlier. Now that could be a bullpen factor too, Joe Boyle,
Joe Boyle.
this
Yep.
year. Yeah. So, but yeah, I guess we'll move on and we'll talk a little bit about their overall outlook here. Their over under win total is actually 81.5, which is down from the last team we did. But David, are you gonna take the over under on this?
I'm going to take the over, but I'm going to take it by like 2 games. I'm going to say they win 83. I think they're going to be right there hovering around 500 all season. That's what they were at last year. I do think this is a better team than was there last year, with the exception of the bullpen. I think the bullpen last year was a little bit better, but the rest of the team is improved. The young guys are going to get the chance. I think Caminero getting a full season shot at third base is really big. We didn't really mention it, but I think that's a massive thing. If they sell at the deadline, but they sold at the deadline this year and they still went 500. I'm going to say they go over 81.5, but that's only a 3-game gain from last season, or 2-game gain from last season. They won 80 last year. So this is not a playoff team. I think the AL is just too competitive for them to get in, barring some crazy Rays miracles, but we've seen those before, right? So, history says, we were looking at the Brewers earlier. History says bet on the Brewers. I would not bet on the Rays, unfortunately. I just think the division they're in is too competitive. I think they're in a spot where you have to have everything break perfectly to make the playoffs. And I just don't think it's going to happen, especially with the turmoil of playing at a stadium they're unfamiliar with. The pitching might go crazy poorly, right? The hitting might go crazy good. It might go poorly. There's so many unknowns, but I assume this team ends up around 500. I feel like that's pretty reasonable. And we'll say they win 1 or 2 more than that.
Yeah, I have a hard time with this division because I think I took the over on the Blue Jays too, and it's just like this division's got so many teams that are pretty good. The
Mm-hmm.
Red Sox got better, the Yankees got better. I'm a little concerned about this team with their. I'm a little concerned that this team's not going to hit. I'm not a huge believer in Morel.
Yeah.
I don't. I'm skeptical on Brandon Lau staying healthy. I don't know if the bottom of their lineup's going to hit. Johnny DeLuca, Taylor Walls, or Hassan Kim. Like I don't think any of those guys are like high end hitters. Yandy Diaz has been before, but I just don't. I don't know. This team seems to me like they would need some contributions from young guys, and then their pitchers. A bunch of those guys have to kind of. They need a bunch of their pitchers, their young guys, to come into their own all at the same time, and it might happen for them, but I don't know. I'm probably going to take the under. I kind of regret taking the under already. They're probably going to end up being over,
It's
but
just how it works.
you got to take the under on some. And I don't know. It's going to be weird playing at a minor league park too
Mm-hmm.
for them. But yeah, the odds to make the playoffs plus 285, odds to win the AL East plus 750, odds to win the World Series plus 6,000. So, David, any final thoughts on the Rays?
I'm excited for the young guys. I'm excited for Junior Caminero. I think he's the best part of all of this. They've got some veteran leadership, right? They've got some young guys with some upside. The pitching is all young guys with upside, like we mentioned. This is going to be a fun team to follow, regardless of whether or not they win a lot of games, and that's what makes them a compelling watch this season.
Yep, for sure. So, all right. Well, I guess that'll do it for us here today. Don't forget, like, comment, subscribe. Appreciate y'all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.